to another edition of Book Talk with Jordan and Stefan. We are now in the third part of Neil Gaiman's Trigger Warning, and I should first apologize to our listeners. We ended up taking December off. Just the holidays and busy stuff in our various lives kept us away from Book Talk longer than we would have liked, and I know a lot of listeners were waiting for the conclusion of our thoughts on this episode, or on this particular book. And so I've been looking forward to giving it to you. I think I have some interesting thoughts about some of these stories in the latter half, or the latter third, really, of the book. But before we get into that, I wanted to clarify something I said at the end of the last episode of Book Talk, and that was I had said that we had something coming up that was going to be a book that would be very interesting for our readers. And that book was going to be My Friend Dahmer by Derf Backderf. It's a graphic novel about a man, the author, the comic or the graphic novel artist in question, that grew up in high school. He actually went to high school with Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer. And so the movie of that has come out. I think it kind of vanished without a trace, but they made a movie adaptation as well, which is what got me interested. So that is coming up in the months ahead. We are going to do it. However, we've added two books that we're going to get to before that. The first is going to be Birth of Fire by Jerry Purnell. That will be coming up next. And we're doing that one because Jerry Purnell, Dr. Jerry Purnell, a luminary legend of the science fiction world, passed away in October of last year. And so we had originally talked about doing one of his collaborations with Larry Niven, such as The Mote in God's Eye. But ultimately, with his passing, it seemed more appropriate to focus on one of his solo works. So our next book will be Birth of Fire. But after that, we have coming up something that regular listeners to this program will know is very near and dear to our hearts, and that is the second novel in the Scythe series. If you saw our first review, our review of the first book, Scythe, you'll know that we were both just blown away. This is one of those science fiction franchises that has potential to just really do incredible things, and the first book was amazing. The second book comes out next week, so Stefan and I will be devouring that like hungry dogs, I'm sure. Anyway, so that's what's coming up, and then after we get those two books out of the way, we will be doing My Friend Dahmer, and I think that's the movie. Since the movie didn't make as big a splash as I would have liked, I think we can just focus on the graphic novel and talk about it in and of itself. Anyway, Stefan, how have you been?
Oh, I've been fine, thank you very much. Been a wonderful freezing Christmas and now January, and I'm still snuggled in all my minus 18 degrees centigrade weather clothing and trying to keep as dry and warm as possible.
Yes, indeed. Okay, cool. Well, let's get into this latter section of Trigger Warning. The last story we looked at was Nothing O'Clock, and that was the Doctor Who story. And that one was pretty cool. There's some good ideas, and I think, as I said in the last one, it's kind of like, it's a really good idea, but I've seen maybe 2 episodes of Doctor Who in my entire life, so, for my money, it could have just been any science fiction story, but it was a cool idea. So the next one is Diamonds and Pearls, a Fairy Tale. Stefan, set that one up for us.
Okay, this is a poetic expression of Gaiman's ideas, and then he takes it literal in certain senses. Think of it like there's a wife who gets married. She has a daughter from a previous marriage, and the husband dies, so she's stuck with this other girl. And the other girl is the good stepdaughter. Her daughter is the bad one. And what comes from her is either allegory or literal things. The same with the daughter, and that ends in the death of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's hard to interpret if you take it one way, but if you actually appreciate the allegory and say, yes, the goodness and manners and kindness comes from the things you need and provide you with life, even though the life happens to be represented by drugs, and that's the point. And then badness comes from the the bad daughter who's not very nice and what have you, and produces deadly snakes, which kills everyone. So you have to remember this is a fairy tale, so that is the point. But because it has a modern angle, it's done with drugs and pawn shops and what have you. It makes you think of like, okay, wait, is this really is stuff really happening and falling out of people's mouths, and it's just this ridiculous scenario.
Well, I think that was, for me, that was one of kind of the interesting things in this one, was that it has you kind of not literally, not specifically like we're recreating this or we're recreating that, but rather just kind of sensing some of the classic fairy tale tropes. You have people, the idea instead of Little Red Riding Hood going to grandmother's house in the woods, we're going on a drug run and that kind of thing. And I like that, though. I like it almost made me think of Philip K. Dick's writing, in a sense, like where Philip K. Dick would do science fiction based on drug use. This was fantasy magic realism based on drug use. So it's a pretty cool idea. Gives you a little bit to think about. I think the only thing that was kind of, believe it or not, the only thing that was unrealistic for me is just the idea of one sister being absolute good and one being absolute evil. And again, that's another fairy tale trope that we see, that, the good queen and the evil queen and all of this stuff, that's a fairly common fairy tale thing. It's a Cinderella kind of thing. But putting that in in a modern contemporary context makes it difficult for me to buy the idea of absolute good or absolute evil. But other than that, I rather enjoyed it.
There's one thing that did confuse me, which was the beauty being the greatest truth. I don't even think beauty had anything to do with this story, but that was sort of the message at the end. And I'm thinking, is it good manners and kindness which is beautiful? Is that what's going on? Because the drugs and the whores and the evil mother, that nothing was really attractive, like visually attractive about that. So I'm kind of curious why he said that, unless that is his belief that beauty is not this visual thing, because we're seeing all these disgusting things, and beauty is some other non-physical standard he's referring to, I think.
Well, in a way, I mean, I think there's a thing that the fairy tales are always in the romantic world literary movement, and so with romanticism, it's like beauty and goodness are directly tied together. Form follows function. That's why everybody, like when people read Atlas Shrugged, they think it's weird that all of the good guys are muscle-bound, brilliant muscle-bound men, studs, and the women are all gorgeous, and then all of the bad guys are all wormy, pathetic, weak-chinned. All the women are anorexic and ugly and everything. And it's because it's romanticism. Form follows function. So I think that's kind of what was going on there. But again, it hits at an odd angle because, again, we're trying to take all these fairy tale tropes and put them into modern times, and the tropes work up to a point, and then it becomes impossible to have realism and naturalistic realism and romanticism in the same context.
And I have a feeling that he was being a bit too clever with his sentences or with his diction, because you have like the description of a ruby red cry of pain, and then a literal ruby fell from her mouth. It's kind of like, oh, okay, you just said that, and then you want it to be physical. It's like, okay. And that happens with all the magic between the daughters.
Yeah, I mean that's ultimately what's going on there. It's a nice idea. I like that it's quick. It's just kind of in and out, and just a quick idea. And I think I like good short stories that can go 2 pages and still leave you thinking, for days. A lot of the good creepypastas are like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So the next one is The Return of the Thin White Duke. This one was neat to me because it reminded me, this is something, if you read Heavy Metal, the comic book Heavy Metal a lot, as I do, and I have a stack of heavy metal comics here at home that is taller probably than the average fourth grader. I mean, it's rather I'm rather a fan of heavy metal. But one of the things that they would explore a lot are things like it's something you see in the show Eon Flux as well. It's that kind of almost trans-dimensional romance that's happening. Romances that are happening between gods, between royalty. These intergalactic royalties and everything. And that's very much what's going on here. I mean, there's an element of tying it back into modern times as well and making it literal again. But just the imagery of it, the world of it, was very attractive to me.
Oh yeah, the setting is really probably the most fascinating setting he's made so far in these stories. It's the ending that really throws you for a loop there, because everything is set up to be this whole quest for finding oneself, finding one's feelings, one's heart, and you're really invested in this world where he's the pinnacle of everything, and then it just sort of slowly tears away within a few pages, and you're like, wait, what? Whoa! And then it's suddenly contemporary, and it's like this guy you just met at the bar last night at the university club, and you're like, what? Oh, okay. So it has this. I don't know if you like tearing away at the veil of mysticism that Gaiman just slowly created and then just threw away. So that's beautiful by itself. I just wish we knew more about what was going on there.
Yeah,
Aside from this monarch descending.
Yeah, no. Well, absolutely, and that the ending didn't really work for me just because I wanted it to stay in that world that was set up so well, and it would be kind of like, I mean, it's almost like, you know how, and this is a spoiler alert, but in the Lego movie, which I actually haven't seen the Lego movie, but I know that this is ultimately what happens. It's revealed that all the Legos are, the Legos that we've been following, and they're running around having their daily lives and everything. It turns out that's all just make-believe and some kids playing with his Legos. In that movie, it works. It makes sense because they are Legos. So we're not, it's not totally out of line to think that would happen. But in this, it's not. This feels almost like, imagine you've been watching Blade Runner, and for the last 2 hours of a 2 hour and 10-minute movie, you have been in Los Angeles in the future, which is next year now, but you've been in Los Angeles in the future and in this beautiful cyberpunk noir world, and then all of a sudden it's back in contemporary times, and it's like, what? Don't pull me out of that world, man. I need that, and that's what I didn't like. But the atmosphere that he created before that was very satisfying. It's very enjoyable. Feminine endings. This was one of my favorite because it was so cool. And I guess to me it was so cool. It was so neat the way it was done. And I don't want to. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's one of the ones you can't really talk about without spoiling it. So if such things matter to you, hit pause, or hit mute or whatever. But this is a story. This is basically a love letter to a woman from her stalker, and the stalker is actually a statue that she walks by every day. And as I'm saying that, it sounds like something Brian Griffin would come up with on Family Guy. But I thought it was neat. I thought to me, it made me think I could imagine this woman beautifully, that she would be like, an actress like Juliette Binoche or Irene Yacob, very high society sort of woman in Europe somewhere, and the statue is enamored with her. To me, I really liked it as this kind of haunting, gothic love story that got Every Breath You Take by the Police stuck in my head,
Well, it should. This is the way I think he works well with telling horror or suspense stories. I think the Click Clack Rattlebag previous story was not his best, if not anything worthwhile. This is where he really shines, because you could take it two ways. You can see it as, yes, this is a statue, or this is a person who's so obsessed with someone they see themselves and describe themselves as statues. and
Yeah.
or maybe a performance mime or something like
Yeah.
that in the middle of all this, because she has details throughout, not just the outside but the inside. So this person's getting into places and
Hmm.
describing like the room they're
Yeah.
in, that they're visiting, and they're
Right.
going to be here soon. I can't wait. And if you just turn around, it's like, holy crap, she's really crazy. So
Hmm.
there's this sense of over obsession and
Hmm.
need to tell this person what's going on, and we don't know if it's real, if it's just this creature, if it's
Hmm.
just this lunatic. We don't know, and that's the big moment you want to see,
Hmm.
and why it works so well as a short story, because you
Yeah.
don't see it, you have to visualize it, and this is why Gaiman works so well, and it's just long enough for you to go, oh, I wish there was more, but I understand why it's this short.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, exactly. It's so evocative or provocative, I should say. And it's one of those things. It's kind of like, the feeling I got was, one of the things that one of the filmmaking techniques that you'll see, the Friday the 13th movies, the early ones did this a lot, and some of the similar movies, which was you hold off showing people the monster by having the first few kills happen from the monster's eyes. You know what I mean? So you're not seeing who it is, as building the suspense, and that's kind of what this is like. I mean, it's like we're experiencing this very much from this person's view, and in experiencing it from their view, it's limiting what we're seeing of them. What we're aware of, and that kind of thing. So it's very haunting that way. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this one. Uh, the next one, observing formalities. You want to set this one up?
There's really not much to say about here. Essentially, it's a woman doesn't get an invitation to, I think, a christening,
Yeah.
but the rest of her, like her sisters, do.
Hmm.
And the problem with this, I don't know if you want to, it's basically poetry, but it's forcing itself to be prose, and it's
Hmm.
one or two sentence paragraphs, and it's so brief and so curt. I can't grasp what he's going for here. This is really one of those things where I think he missed on what he was trying to tell us.
Hmm. Yeah. I do too. It's one of those things where it's like it just feels like I know there's something sinister here. I just don't know what in the hell it is.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
when you have a story that's like, okay, I can write a short story. How short? And this is way too short. If he had like one extra page or two extra paragraphs I can sink my
yeah.
teeth into, I can go, okay, I know where you're going with this. I know what the point was. But now it's just this woman who's trying to. I guess it's an old woman, and I think she's sad and
Hmm.
disgruntled because she didn't get to go where she wanted, and she's like the
Yeah.
woman to go places. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah. I mean, to give the reader an idea, I could write a story this vague right now. Watch, I'll improvise it. Let's see. The snow came early this year. It was bitterly white. I watched it fall in the parking lot at the grocery store. I look forward to hiding the bodies. You know, like I mean, it almost feels like you're reading haiku. I mean, it's very it just
It's
I
too
mean, it's
poetic for
yeah
what he's trying to say, and it doesn't work. Yeah.
yeah it's now talking about things that don't work. This next one, the sleeper and the spindle. Okay, I have a confession to make. Part of the reason it is true, it is correct that we paused book talk because of the winter break and everything, and just the holidays and getting through all that. But part of the reason I personally have had trouble finishing this book was this very story. I could not get into it. I had to force it down my throat.
Yeah.
This for me was the worst story in the collection because this is not fairy tales or trying to take fairy tales and put a new spin on them. This is fairy tales painted by numbers, so much so that the characters don't even have names. They're just the queen and the dwarf and the this and that, because we already know what the hell these things are. It was totally uninteresting. I could not get into it at all.
Well, the thing with this is another one of Gaiman's stories where he hires a illustrator, and he makes a little fairy tale children's book ish of it. So we're missing. This is how I see his works and other ones as well. It's like making a beautifully gold brooch, and not having the gem laid in it. And it's like, okay, this is a beautiful bracelet, but it's nothing. Like, what's the point? Like, you're missing the whole heart of the work. And so we're missing all the illustrations. And if you go online and you search for this book, they're there. They're beautiful. So that's the missing component here, because this is basically a fairy tale story. And it's like, okay, I know what they're doing here. I get this. I get the analogy here, but it's missing that ending. It's missing the connection. There's no romance. There's no real sense of adventure. There is an adventure, but it's not adventurous. It's just sort of they're going somewhere, and you find out what happened. You're like, okay, great. Well, let's walk away now.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's one of those. People wonder why I can't get into Tolkien, why I don't like Tolkien, and it's because so many fantasy stories are built off of Tolkien, and it's just walking, and it's just we walked here, then we walked here, then we walked here. And I mean, I've used this motif in my own writing, so I'm not totally immune to this, to criticism for this, but that's what this was. And it was, I can see how this would be enjoyable if you've got the beautiful visuals to go with it. Like you say, it's just like, I'm not that crazy about Lord of the Rings, but obviously if you see the movie and you get to see the Elvish village and the Hobbit town and all that and laid out the world of it and everything, that's fun. So I could see it working that way. But yeah, you go into it not knowing that's what it is, and it just feels like, it would literally be like if I tried to write a crime story and I had a character that was just called The Killer.
And this was rather longer compared to the other stories, so you're thinking there's going to be more substance to it, and it was just a long journey that really didn't have a payoff.
And a long journey in more ways than one, yes. But it's that one didn't do it for me. The next two pieces are both kind of poems.
Yeah.
One is called Witchwork, the other in something. I'm not even going to pretend that I know how to pronounce that, but
it's Gaelic, yeah.
Both of them, Witchwork, I thought was very effective. It was kind of haunting, and pulling them up now. I thought it was kind of haunting. I like this other one that was in Gaelic because I like the idea of the Irish mysticism and everything, and this is something you could read listening to Enya, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? or Clannad. But,
yeah, it's just a weird church story thing. There's something there, but unless you get the vibe, which I did not, it's very hard to grasp. Maybe people who are Scottish or Irish, they know stories like this all the time. It's probably like a folk tale.
Yeah.
Maybe, but other than that, I'm like, this is kind of obscure. Why is this so long? So for a poem, at least, it's being 2-3 pages. And yeah, Witchworks was, again, that's creepy Gaiman. He always does short, weird, horror things. So that's pretty staple for him. I was like, yeah, it's fine. So I think he's just winding down because he really wants to tell his last story, and that's really the point of all this. He wants to hook you into the bigger series that is now very popular on HBO and Netflix and wherever else is being broadcast. So
this is the last story is called Black Dog, and it's it's based on it's a side story for one of the characters from American Gods, and I have never read American Gods, and I have never seen the TV series, and it's weird. People will ask me, I say I like Neil Gaiman. They say, "Have you read American Gods?" And I have not. Now, I know it's like saying you like the Beatles and you've never heard Sgt. Pepper. So I do need to read it at some point. But what's weird is always say, "No, I haven't read American Gods," and they'll say, "But you've seen the show, right?" It's like that seems like that's information I would have provided to you if I had, But anyway, so I don't know American Gods. I don't know who Shadow is or Shadow Moon or whatever. I'm imagining a My Little Pony character, but And we do in a way learn about the magic of friendship in this story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
but but it was that said, not knowing anything about it, not knowing anything about the backstory of the character or anything, I thought it was nice. I thought it was a nice little story. It got a little predictable. It's like, this, when the one character, not to give too much away, but when the one character kisses the other character, you know immediately what she is,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Very predictable, but Gaiman, obviously, if nothing else, writes well. He always has beautiful prose, and the rhythm, the pacing of it was very enjoyable. And it was one of those things where it's like, it's kind of like a jazz standard that you've heard a million times, but a good soloist makes it feel new again. That's kind of what this was, and I enjoyed it. It was pleasant. It was a good way to round out the series, the book. I mean.
Yes, Gaiman is known for doing these sorts of mystical, historical accounts of getting old mythos and bringing them into new. And this one, American Gods, I haven't read all of it, but it's not that interesting a story personally. So when you have a side story like this and you have these characters that you relatively know, this is his safe way of keeping on the tradition of taking mythos and bringing it into the contemporary world. And it's something he knows. He's already written American Gods, so this is like a little exercise for him. And it's easy for everyone else. If you had problems reading any other story in this book, this one is the easiest. It's just okay. It's not too big. It's not too short. There's traditional prose. There's things you're used to. There's going to be magic. There's going to be some weird violence. There's going to be some suspense, but not too much suspense. More contemporary, like 95% contemporary than weird, crazy psychopaths and blood and guts. So yeah, it's the safe Gaiman story that he already knows he can do, and he may as well put it at the end because out of all this, you can then say, okay, I can now read a Gaiman story and get it.
Yeah, exactly. And there is an almost, I mean, in comprehending some of what he's trying to say, he has an almost Shakespearean grasp of metaphor, so it can be a bit hard to follow if you're coming to it new. But I enjoyed the story. I had a good time with it. And I think, so summarizing this book, I would say personally, if you're just getting into Gaiman, read Neverwhere, the book Neverwhere, or the Sandman's comics, obviously, but Neverwhere is the first book by him that I read. It's a self-contained story, modern-day fantasy magic realism, and it's a really good adventure. Like it's something that it's obviously written for an adult audience, but it's the kind of thing you'd enjoy if you like the Jim Henson Labyrinth movie, that kind of thing. That kind of like stepping into the world that's just on the other side of our world, that sort of thing. That book I would recommend for starting Gaiman. This, I think you need to read his stuff a little bit. And what's weird is you almost have to do a little bit of research, like we were saying, because you have to know the different formats that he writes in, that he also does comic books, and he does, children's picture books and that kind of thing, and radio dramas, and all manner of medium. You have to know that and kind of be familiar with how he writes in those genres to really appreciate this. So it's interesting. It's parts of it are very accessible, parts of it are not accessible at all to the outsider. I think my favorite stories, I think we'd probably, if I had to guess, Stefan, I think you and I would probably agree that the thing about Cassandra is probably the best one in here.
That's the most memorable for sure, because it's such a clear and simple tale that really gets you, and it's half the story. So it's not a twist at the end. It's like that is the point of the story. So you read the first part and you're like, oh, okay, and then it just throws you for a loop and you're just gone the rest of the time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's when it's kind of like similar stories that have a similar effect are like Mark Twain's Mysterious Stranger, where it literally just gets inside. It really gets inside your head, really plays with your perception. That's what's cool. That's what's fun about this. Yeah,
there's lots of gems throughout this book. Like my favorite's still the Case of Death and Honey, just because it's Sherlock and it works so well. Without having to be a Sherlock fan, but because I am, I'm like, oh my God, this is what he did. Look at the style. Look at the prose, how he broke it
Mhm.
apart. He had two different perspectives. He brought it all together at the end, and he did justice to the lore, which
Mhm. Yeah.
is very rare for authors to take lore and not change it.
Yeah, he really captured it well, and he captured. I think there's Sherlock Holmes is like a character like Frankenstein, where it's like there's the actual literary character, the way it was written, and then there's this perception of the character that we have in popular culture. You know what I mean? And most of the adaptations of Sherlock Holmes stuff you see are from that vantage of that popular culture interpretation. You know what I mean? It's like again, it's like with Frankenstein. When you think of the Frankenstein monster, everybody immediately thinks of the Boris Karloff thing with the bolts in its neck and all of that. And same thing with Dracula, the same thing with James Bond. All these characters, and yet Gaiman captures the actual essence of Sherlock Holmes. You get the feeling it's like Gaiman is one of the few people who actually knows that the real Sherlock Holmes character in the Arthur Conan Doyle stories never says "elementary, my dear Watson," and that line that's entered popular culture is never said by the character. Things like that. He gets it. He knows what the story is. I think I love that one. I personally like The Man Who Forgot Ray Bradbury. I think that one was kind of just haunting. And I mean, I had a grandfather who passed away from Alzheimer's, and that kind of so that kind of resonated with me. And then I thought Feminine Endings, which we just talked about, was another very strong point.
They're all the ones that we can read and understand to a degree are just good.
Mm-hmm.
They're just very good prose. They're very good
Yeah.
writing. Like And Weep Like Alexander, that was just a simple story that wasn't anything fantastic, but he has one good idea, and he says, "Okay, I'm going to tell a short story, and that's as far as I'm taking it," and he
Yep.
just moves on. It's when he goes and gets poetic and